Hello everyone, welcome back. Welcome to the third installment of our introductory lecture to the operating system course. So in this segment, we will talk about a bit about the history of operating systems. So our history begins around 1950s. It's just after the Second World War. As you guys might know, most or many technologies have military origins. Same is the case with computers. During Second World War, computers the technology to build computers got a major push because of because they helped in winning wars. So a lot of famous scientists they worked on building computers, especially in the United States. So when the war ended, different countries they continued to pursue their ambitions in building more and more better, faster computers. So during the 50s and 60s, the technology that they used to build computers, it was very like the components were very big. They used instead of the transistors, they used those cathode ray tubes, and a computer whose computing power would be much less than your mobile phone would be big. I mean, when I say big, it would be around the size of a very big hall. It would be installed in 2 or 3 rooms. So components were so big. So at that time, they were very expensive machines because, as I said, although the computing power was much less than the mobile phone in your pocket, but at that time it was a very new technology and the most advanced in the whole world. So it cost a lot to build a computer. Not everybody could afford a computer. Most computers were built, uh, purpose built by orders from either the government departments or from very big corporations. And they were targeted toward a specific application. The early computers were built for militaries, and the main job was to calculate the trajectories for different projectiles like missiles, bombs, or cannon shots, etc. So these kind of calculations used to be done by hand, but with the advent of mechanical computing devices and then electrical computing devices, which we today know in the form of computers, they were done electronically. So early computers were built for a specific purpose. So if you were a government department or a very big corporation with lots of money, and if you had a big application which needed to do lots of calculations, let's say you are a weapons manufacturer or you are in the business of weather forecasting, etc., something, a very big application that needs lots of calculations which are almost impossible to do by hand within finite or limited time. So what you would do is you would contact a computer manufacturer and tell them that I need a computer to do this thing. That computer manufacturer would take your order and they would build a custom computer for you, a purpose-built computer which was built to run only that particular application. Let's say that was about weather forecasting. So this computer would have special hardware which would do special type of calculations, the calculations that are used in weather forecasting equations, etc. So it would be only geared or optimized for that particular application. So when the computer would be ready, they would basically also write the program for you to run on that computer. So you would get that computer along with that program, and you would run that program on that particular computer. So that computer would be a very big machine, a very expensive machine. It used to cost at least multiple tens of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars. So it was very expensive, and it used to run only one program. In the beginning, computers ran only one program. If you, the buyer of the computer, wanted to write a program for that particular computer, you would ask the computer manufacturer for the assembly manual or the programming manual for that computer. In those days, programming used to be done in binary. People used to have those punch cards where you would punch holes to type characters in binary format, and then those uh, cards would be basically multiple cards would constitute a program. One punch card used to have one line of programming. So if you had a program like which had 1500 lines, then you would have 1500 punch cards for that. So you would type that program on punch cards, and then you would basically feed it into the input device, which read the holes in those punch cards and then converted that those holes into ASCII characters, which were then interpreted as the the language for that computer, and then compiled it and ran it on the computer. So at that time, the people used to do it in binary by punching holes, but then slowly we realized that it was difficult for humans to program in binary. So they went a step up and they converted or they invented this ASCII representation for the binary, which is called an assembly language. So using that assembly language, you would write that program in characters that look like text, ASCII text, but still it was a very low level programming language. And assembly, as you know, is hardware dependent. A different hardware would have a different assembly language. So in our example, if that computer manufacturer gave you a computer, they would basically give you that programming manual to which would contain assembly for that particular computer, and you would use that assembly to program, write your program for that computer. Let's say after 5 years, you basically ordered another computer from that particular manufacturer. So they will build a new computer for you from scratch. And that new computer would be purpose built for perhaps a different application, and its hardware would be different, optimized for the second application. And since the hardware would be different, it was, common that the whole assembly also was different for the second computer, which means you could not take your program written for first computer and compile them for the second computer. You have to rewrite your program for that new computer which came with a new architecture. So that was common in 50s and 60s. That's what I mean when I say computers were custom made and came with their own software, which means they basically had their own assembly language based on their own hardware. So every computer would be of a different, a different hardware. Slowly, the computer manufacturers started realizing that a lot of things are needed by almost every programmer. Let's say communication with hardware. Usually, every program would need to communicate with the input or output devices. Every program would need to display some output on the screen, or in those days they used to have this paper tape program. Computers printed on paper, not on computer screen. So every program needed to do I/O. Similarly, every program needed to access memory because usually the data was kept in memory, so every program needed to access memory. And similarly, many other things that were needed by all the programmers. So to facilitate the task of the programmers, what those computer manufacturers started doing were that they started providing code for the most common functionalities along with the computer. So these compiled codes that they provided, they were basically libraries that the programmers could use to do those most frequent tasks that every programmer needed to do, and that was too low level for each programmer to implement. Like they took a lot of time to communicate with IO devices if the programmer wrote the code themselves. So the computer manufacturers basically facilitated the task for the programmers by providing those commonly used routines in the form of libraries. So these humble libraries were the basis or the foundation which were later developed into operating systems. So the word operating system comes from operator, operation, operator, operating. So in those days, not everybody knew how to use a computer. So computers used to have specialized trained personnel which were responsible for running the computers. If you wanted to run a program, what you would do is you would write your program on punch cards and then take those punch cards to the person responsible for running that computer. We used to call those persons operators. So the operator would take your pack of punch cards, feed it into the machine, and then run your program on the machine. Since those computer operators were responsible for running the computer or the system, the same tasks were slowly, with the passage of time, taken over by the software. Now, as I hope it's clear from our previous discussion, that the major software, the main software that is responsible for managing all the hardware in the computer along with all the other stuff. So we can say that this particular software is in charge of running the whole computer. So this basically software has replaced those human operators which used to run the computers. So the operating system, the name basically refers back to those human operators that used to run the computers. And now since this task is being done by software, so this particular software is now called the operating system. So at that time, the operator would basically take your program and run it on the computer, and the output produced by the computer would be transferred to you, the user who wrote the program. Those programs basically were not interactive programs. They did not stop in the middle to take input from the user. Okay, so you just gave the program as well as the input data once at the start to the computer. The computer would run the program, which would basically process the data, and then in the end, it would produce the output. There was no interactivity during the execution of the program. So all such programs were basically run in a linear fashion in batches. So this kind of processing is called batch processing. In batch processing, you run multiple programs back to back through the computer. The reasoning behind this is because at that time computers were very, very expensive and we could not afford the computer to stay idle. The corporation who had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on a computer, they would not like such a precious resource to remain idle, because idle times mean the computer is not being utilized and therefore the money that they spent on that computer is being wasted. So they would try to maximize the utilization of the computers and try to utilize or exploit every single cycle of that computer. So there was no like interactivity with the user, because users, as you know, are very slow compared to the computer processors. So if the computer has to wait for user input, then during that time the processor will be sitting idle, and that's basically wastage of resources in the eyes of that corporation. So what they would do is they would collect these programs. The operators would collect these programs from the users, and then once they have sufficient number of programs collected, they would call it a batch, and then they would feed the batch in the computer and run the batch together. Only one program would be running at any given time, but these were fed into the memory, and the computer ran those programs back to back. It would run the first program, and then when the first program is finished, it would take the second program from the memory, run the second program, the third program, and therefore the computer would not be sitting idle during any of the time. And while the first batch was running, the operator would collect programs for the second batch, which they would load into the computer, and then so that after finishing the first batch, the computer could run the second batch. So that kind of processing was done by the operators, and we used to call them batch processing. So in the end of 1960s, middle of 1960s rather, they said that okay, these libraries, they are okay, but still we need to have some more functionality in software that can manage user programs and also let multiple users communicate with the computer. So this MIT University, General Electric, and AT&T, they pooled their resources together, and together they started this project whose name was Multics. And the target of this project was to build a very ambitious operating system which would run multiple programs simultaneously on the computer, let multiple users access the computer simultaneously, and do a lot of other things. The thing to note is that this project was very ambitious at that time. So MIT, it's still one of the most leading universities in the world in terms of science and technology. General Electric, these days you see them making more like washing machines, ovens, etc. But another telecom stuff also. But at that time they used to make computers also. Similarly for AT&T, AT&T had the monopoly on telecommunication in the United States at that time, and to improve their telecom system, they wanted to have better computing equipment. So these three institutions, they pooled their resources and grouped many talented persons together so that they can build this operating system called Multics. They started, I think, in 1965, and during after 4 years, around 1969, they realized that this process was perhaps a little too ambitious for at that time, and the chances of success seemed pretty slim. So slowly, these partners, they started backing out of the project. AT&T left the project in 1969, and they took their members who were participating in this project back and put them to some other uses inside the AT&T. Two of the people that we'll be hearing in this operating system context a lot, who were part of the Multics project and then recalled by MIT, were Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie. Dennis Ritchie, as you know, is the inventor of the C language that I hope you all know how to program in C. And Ken Thompson, we credit him for inventing the Unix operating system. So when Ken and Ritchie, they came back to AT&T in 1965 and 1969, they basically had learned a lot by participating in the Multics project, and some of the good ideas they thought they could implement it separately in another system. So basically, in their office buildings, they found this old computer called PDP-7, which was not being used at that time. So Ken Thompson started developing different stuff on this PDP-7. So the first thing that he developed was a file system to access hard disk on this computer. And then later they used a PDP-11 to port the same system to this PDP-11 system. This is like in 1970, 71, etc. During that time, Dennis Ritchie also started working on the C language. So in the early 1970s, the first version of the Unix, Ken Thompson, he wrote it in assembly, and then with the passage of time, C was developed, and he used C to write the second version of the Unix, the operating system, which we later came to call the Unix operating system. So Unix started with the file system, and then he added some memory management and some process management along with some I/O handling, and this system basically became a small operating system, which we today know as the origin or ancestor of the Unix and Linux family of the operating system. So during that time, computers also started sharing ISAs. As I said earlier, computers were custom built, and every computer came with a new hardware and new assembly language or a new ISA. IBM 360 was perhaps the first computer which basically built different computers but used the same hardware and therefore the same ISA, the same assembly language. I think 3 different models were made. One was the smallish computer, one was a medium-sized computer, one was a very big, very powerful computer. But the main characteristic of this series of computers was that they all used the same assembly language. Right? So that was a big thing at that time. So computer starting ISAs and also the technology to make the computers that also improved. So computers started shrinking. And then as the operating system started improving on computers, they were able to run multiple programs on the computers. As we discussed earlier computer ran only one program at any given time, and there was no operating system on those computers. There was only a small, usually a big program running on those computers. Then they started providing libraries for commonly used tasks, and then these commonly used task libraries were further enhanced and they became operating systems. These commonly used tasks basically included communicating with hardware, doing I/O, writing and reading from the hard disks, doing memory management, etc. So Ken Thompson in early 70s, he wrote Unix, and starting from that file system implementation and then moving on to memory management and process management. So then during the late 70s and early 80s, other operating systems also started appearing. The computers also started continued to shrink, and in the 60s we said that there were big computers only affordable by big corporations or governments. 70s there were many computers which smallish companies could also afford, and then 80s saw the arrival of personal computers. They were small, they could fit on a desk, and even one person, persons could also afford to buy those computers. Expensive, but still rich person could buy. So for PCs, they basically came with different operating systems. The IBM PCs, they came with the IBM operating systems. Some PCs you could install Unix on, and at that time we also saw the emergence of MS-DOS provided by Microsoft Corporation. DOS was the ancestor of Windows, and it was a non-graphical operating system. The Unix operating system developed by Ken Thompson at AT&T Bell Laboratories was the property of AT&T, and they used to share their operating system with different universities at a small cost, but they also sold this Unix operating system to different corporations. At that time, different people, they had an idea that software should be free, because this Unix operating system, different people were contributing to it from all, different parts of the United States. So it was not fair for one company to keep all the rights and enjoy all the benefits that came from selling this operating system. So Richard Stallman, he founded this FSF, Free Software Foundation, which basically says that software should be free in the sense that it should be freely available, like you should not charge for it, and then also that you should be free to modify it. So free is used in two senses. Like free means without any cost, and also free means freedom to modify it. And freedom to modify means you provide the source code for the software along with the software, so that the person who is buying or downloading the software, they can modify the source code to modify the software if they feel the need. So this was also the time when this open source or free software movement was born. So since AT&T was selling Unix, Stallman and company, the Free Software Foundation, they started an initiative to create a parallel operating system from scratch that they can provide as free to the users. So this operating system was supposed to be called the GNU Hurd. Hurd was the kernel of that operating system, and GNU basically stands for GNU is not Unix. It's a recursive acronym. This basically this part comprises all the other software that are provided with the operating system. As I showed in the previous slides, the operating system is composed of the core kernel as well as the other software that is provided with the operating system, which consists of the system libraries as well as different applications. So these days, the GNU software is provided with the Linux kernel, because the development on the Hurd kernel was slow. So to compete with Unix, they basically adopted another kernel which was written by Linus Torvalds, who at that time was a master's student at a Finnish university. So during his master's time, he wrote a small kernel and then shared it with the whole world as a free operating system. So this Free Software Foundation, they basically collaborated with Linus, and then they started providing this operating system whose kernel was Linux, but the software on top of the kernel or around the kernel was provided by GNU. So we can call this, the correct name the Free Software Foundation people insist for Linux is GNU/Linux. So it's basically the Linux kernel surrounded by the GNU software. So Minix was another operating system written by Andrew Tannenbaum, who was a professor and at a university in Netherlands, I think, and he was also teaching this operating system course. So he wrote this Minix, an operating system for teaching purposes. So in the 90s, as I said, Linux was born. So and Microsoft also, they upgraded their MS-DOS operating system to a graphical operating system, which today we know as Windows. So this was the evolution of operating system in the 90s. There were also other operating systems also. This is by no way a comprehensive overview. In the 90s, apart from Linux, Windows, there were other operating systems as well. There were a bunch of Unix variants, and also I think other operating systems like BIOS, a lot of other operating systems. But we are focusing mainly on these two because Windows is the most used on desktops, and Linux because we will be using Linux in labs mostly. So during 2000s, there was like the mobile devices started being common, and we had mobile phones which were running multiple programs. So we needed again operating systems to run those devices, to manage programs, memory, other hardware on those devices. So we saw the birth of mobile OSs. Today, we know these mobile OSs in the form of Android, iOS, and other operating systems, mobile operating systems. So this is the situation today, and what is in store for us in future. I'm not sure, but even today we see that the cloud platforms are very prevalent. So these cloud platforms, their working and their management is quite different from personal computers or mobile computers. So again, they need specialized software, specialized operating systems to manage the resources and the application on clouds. So these very big companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Alibaba, etc., who run those cloud infrastructures, they have built their own special operating system that run on their clouds. And historically, most of the development of operating system has been done in C and C++. Before C, like in the 1960s or early 70s, it was done in assembly. And now, during late 70s, 80s, 90s, most of the operating system development was done in C and C++. In future, we don't know so far that C, C++ still continue, but there is a new language called Rust, which their inventors are pitching as an alternative to C and or C++ to develop system software, including the operating system. So how far this is going to succeed, so far we don't know, but in future we'll see what happens. So cloud OSs and Rust are something to look out for in future. And of course, C, C++, you need to master them if you want to develop operating systems now. So there are a couple of links that I'm providing here about the history of operating systems. There are two very good videos. There are many, but I've chosen these two. One is this very recent interview of Brian Kernighan with Lex Fridman, available on YouTube. It's long and he talks about a lot of things. He was at Bell Labs when Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie were developing Unix. He had an office in the same corridor and he was a witness to all this history. So he tells you a lot of stuff, what happened during that time in this video. It's a very interesting video. So Brian Kernighan, by the way, Dennis Ritchie, I think passed away a few years ago, and Ken Thompson still works at Google. These days he works at Google. So have a look at this video, and it's a little longish video. He talks about a lot of things. It's like approximately 2 hours, quarter to 2 hours video. And next, the second is a half an hour video provided by AT&T. AT&T, as I said, is a company who employed Dennis Ritchie and Ken Thompson. So they basically have some video video clips from the time of the development of Unix operating system, and they also tell a very good story of how Unix was developed. So you basically see those actors, Ritchie, Ken Thompson, and Kernighan, in real life working at AT&T. It's a small video, half an hour, and I think you will find it very interesting. So with this, we'll conclude the introduction to this course, and from the next week, we will basically actually start reading about how an operating system works. So to give you something to read for this week, this is the book that I showed you in the first section of this introduction. So, this yellow part, the introduction chapter, it's a very small chapter, 10 pages max. Go through it over the weekend or during this week and try to get a feel for this book. If you have any questions, you could write down in comments below this video and I'll try to answer them. Go through the introduction and try to start reading about operating systems. So that's all for this week. This was the introduction, and as I said, we will start our course properly next week. Thank you very much.